Hey Kathleen, it's so great to have you joining us on Zoom. So you've recently been to the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games, which sounds incredible, and we're really looking forward to hearing about that. But yeah, welcome.
Thanks, Ben. Nice to see you again after all these years.
Yeah, it's been a long time. But yeah, so we go back to we went to school together, but a lot of people here will possibly never have heard of you before. It'd be interesting just to hear a little bit briefly about your journey. How did you end up in Tokyo, and your sports rowing? How did you find yourself getting into that as well?
Yeah, so my name is Kathleen Noble. I'm a Ugandan athlete. So I was born and grew up in Uganda, and growing up I was always very into sports. My first kind of introduction to international sports was through swimming. So I've been swimming since I was like 3 years old, and kind of as I was going through school, I started getting interested in the idea of competing for Uganda on the international level. And so in 2012, I represented Uganda in the swimming world championships. And that was an awesome experience. But I suppose after that, I kind of felt like I had spent so much of my life swimming, and I was kind of done with that and wanted to change. So when I went to university, I came to the United States for university, and I was at Princeton. And my first year there, I thought, oh, I'm done with sports. I've spent so much time doing sports. You know, I want to pursue other interests. But then I found I really missed sports. And my roommate was a recruit to the rowing team, and she loved rowing. I mean, in certain spheres, people who row just like their whole life is rowing. And that was kind of my impression of her. So I didn't hardly see her the whole first year, but all I knew is she rowed and she loved rowing. And she kind of encouraged me to try it out. I didn't realize that you could walk on to varsity sports. I thought you had to be recruited, but rowing is actually a sport that a lot of people start later in life, partially because boats only come in one size. So you can't really row as a child easily. And I guess the facilities, people often don't have access to the facilities. So there's actually a lot of people that start rowing in university. So my second year of university, I walked onto the team looking for an opportunity to be outside every day, looking for a chance to get regular exercise, to be part of a team again, to compete again. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll like this rowing thing. And then it turned out I really enjoyed rowing, and I turned out to be very good at it. So that was kind of a very exciting time, I remember, because yeah, I was this novice walk-on. I had never rowed before, and yet I was like getting better so quickly. And so by the time that we were like halfway through the year, the coach was heat racing me against girls who had been recruited to the team. And I guess he like saw potential in me that I didn't see, and it was very surprising for me that he would put me up against these girls who had been recruited, and then to win against them, and like I ended up racing in the varsity 8, so like the first boat for Princeton lightweights my first year at US Nationals. And so that was kind of like where my journey of rowing started. And then just by chance, the Ugandan rowing coach, I didn't even know Uganda had a rowing team. Uganda doesn't really have a very established rowing team. It's like a very it's quite a new sport in Uganda and quite underdeveloped. But anyway, the Ugandan national coach was in Princeton at a training camp for coaches, and he ran into one of my teammates and was chatting with her, and she told him about me. And he was very excited because there's very few women that row in Uganda. And so he reached out to me, and when I was back in Uganda that Christmas, we met up, and he was very excited and saying, oh, you're going to go to, the world championships and all these things. And at that time, I'd only been rowing for 6 months, and I'd never been in a single. I'd only been in 8. So completely different sort of rowing experience. And so I was like, no, I can't do that. There's no way. But it was sort of, it's planted something in my mind. And so then the following year, I actually ended up taking a semester off from school and rowing for Uganda. Rowing in Uganda, training in Uganda, I learned to scull there with coach William Mwanga. And it was a very, I guess, like humbling experience to go from Princeton rowing, which is like world-class, best facilities sort of place, to rowing back home where we sometimes had to stick our boats together with duct tape because they were like cracked or missing things. And but I really enjoyed my time there, even though it was hard in many ways, because I got to become a part of the rowing community in Uganda, um, and I guess just like see what things are like there, see the struggles that they have gone through, and have my own set of frustrations and disappointments associated with that. And so I think like as I've gone through the rest of my journey and been very successful in other ways and gotten to go to the Olympics and all of these things, I feel like having that time that I was training in Uganda with those people has like really stuck with me and gave me the sense like if I go to the Olympics, like I want it to be for the sake of those people and kind of like helping them and promoting what they're doing. So I guess that was a very long way to answer whatever the initial question was.
No, that was great.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
So that was kind of comforting.
Wow. And so then what was it actually like being in Tokyo? Because I know that there was a lot of restrictions still. Japan was quite hard on it, but what was it actually like to be at an Olympics as an athlete?
It was definitely restrictive compared to, I'm sure, what the Olympics usually is. I mean, I would say like some of the aspects that were really cool were being in the Olympic Village, being surrounded by athletes from all over the world and all the different sports. And so it's a very fun atmosphere to just be in the dining hall or walking around, and you just get to see people from every country of the world and just of every body type. You have the huge like boxers and basketball players, and then these tiny little gymnasts, and that's sort of, I don't know where else in the world you would get that amount of diversity in such a small place. And it's a cool experience as well, because there's so much national pride, but without it being aggressive or negative. I think sometimes there can be like a nationalism that's negative and kind of elevating yourself above all other nationalities. But I feel like here it's just like a celebration of all the nations of the world and all the different sports, and people just proud to represent their country on the national stage, international stage. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
But it was pretty restrictive. Like we were not allowed to leave the Olympic Village. We weren't allowed to go to any competition venue except our own competition venue. So you didn't get to watch anybody else. Like in the dining hall, every seat had its own little plastic compartment. So you were like surrounded on three sides. So even if you were sitting next to someone or opposite someone, you wouldn't talk to them because you're like in your own little plastic cubicle. We got tested every day. I mean, there was just a lot of ways that I feel like it was architecture to be safe, but that kind of like necessarily meant to be antisocial. Like they had TVs in the common spaces of the buildings, but there was only 2 chairs. So like you're not really gonna hang out with a bunch of people and watch things because there's no space. So honestly, like I spent a lot of time in my bedroom when I wasn't training, when I wasn't eating. Like you're just hanging out in your room, which was what I expected and was disappointing, but it's like what it had to be. But it I suppose something that was better than I expected was the whole racing experience at the Olympics. So everybody had told me that the Olympics, the Japanese race course for rowing was terrible. It was so windy, it was so wavy. And here in the US, I train sometimes on the Great Salt Lake, and sometimes it's just terrible out there and it's like you can't even row. And so in my mind I was like preparing for this terrible experience of not being able to race, just trying to manage conditions, but in the end actually their race course was pretty nice, and they had these great things that blocked the waves, like these big buoy system that blocked the waves. So even though it was a bit windy, I felt like it was still manageable and rowable, so I was very grateful for that. And then I guess another cool thing was the whole opening ceremony. It was a little disappointing because I thought we were going to get to watch the whole performances that they have, but they bring the athletes out after all the performances are done. So we were just underground while all of that was happening. So we were like underground for probably an hour and a half, just waiting until it's your turn to go out. But everybody was dressed up in their national dress, and so that was another really kind of fun cultural experience to be a part of. Yeah.
Wow, really cool. Next question. So alongside your rowing and your training, you were also kind of, you said you were stuck in uni, or not stuck there by choice. How did you find it trying to balance all these different kind of things that were going on in your life at the same time?
Do you mean training or?
Yes, I think I do mean training. So yeah, training, university life.
Okay.
At some point, you also got married as well. So I'm sure that was also another thing you had to think about. How did you find trying to balance those different things all together?
Yeah, I mean, so I wasn't training for the Olympics at the same time as being in university. I graduated from university in 2018, and I qualified for the Olympics in October 2019. But the training for the Olympics was more manageable than I expected it to be in certain ways. So I was working in a research lab, and my bosses were really supportive of the training that I was doing. And because of the way that the work was, you could kind of make up the hours whenever you wanted to. So I was working full time, but when exactly like I was in lab just depended on me for the most part. And so I trained with a high school team here, actually. So there's not a lot of rowing in Utah, similar to Uganda, I suppose. And so the only competitive rowing team here is a high school team. And I reached out to them when I was starting to prepare to try and go to the qualifiers. So I basically got adopted by this high school team called Utah Crew, and their coaches have been so supportive of me. Essen came to the Olympics with me as my coach, and just like fantastic experience to be part of a team again, even though I'm not a high schooler. It's kind of like this weird situation where I'm training with them, but I'm just like their adopted Olympian. But so anyway, they would have practice at 4 p.m. So I'd have to leave work at like 3:15 to get there in time. But I mean, by and large, like I feel like training was straightforward enough, and I had the flexibility with work to train when I needed to train. And then with the pandemic, things got challenging, as it did for everybody, because we weren't meeting anymore. You weren't allowed to see people, and you're just by yourself, and erging by yourself is so boring. So we're doing that for a few months, and then started going out in singles again. And during the whole pandemic, actually, rowing was a fantastic thing to have, because it meant every day I got to be outside, I got to see other people, which was such a blessing, because so many people didn't have that, and I'm very grateful for that, even though it did mean the Olympics were postponed a year, which was very inconvenient in other ways.
Yeah, sure. Cool. And then kind of more outside of the rowing, so you'd identify yourself as a Christian. How have you found your kind of faith impacts the way you were doing sport, but also just doing life in general?
I would say when I started rowing my first year, I had this sense, I don't know, it felt like a part of my life where I experienced the presence of God. And it was kind of a strange sort of thing, but it kind of felt like it was so hard. Like rowing is really hard. And there were a lot of times, especially in the winter, when we would have these really tough training sessions, and I would end up going so hard that at the end of it, I would like end up throwing up and lying on the floor for 20 minutes and being like, I will never be able to do that again. And I started developing this like fear of rowing and of erging, especially those difficult workouts that we would do. And in the midst of that, I started to feel the sense of like, okay, I can't do this. Like I can't do this by myself. I don't have like the mental fortitude for it. And in that, I felt this sense of like, you can't do it by yourself, but you can do it with me. And I mean, it was just like a sense that I had, a thought that I had, but I feel like it really helped me and made me feel less afraid and made me feel like just a sense of capability to do it, I suppose. And I think there's something about like, I don't know, experiencing God more when you're in a lot of pain, which sometimes I was like during those sessions. And so there was like a sense of like, I don't know, partnership or something. And I mean, I don't know why God would want me to do well rowing. I'm not sure, but it just like felt like a place where I experienced the presence of God. And then, I mean, I feel like in mostly through my training, I don't think my faith really had that much of a play in the day to day of training for the Olympics. But there were certain experiences along the way that were quite powerful. I think I'll just share one that was maybe the most profound for me. So I kind of mentioned like I started developing this fear of rowing, and as I've continued to compete and race, I've started getting, there's a bunch of times that I've gotten quite sick, and like sometimes very sick to the point of being, my senior year, I ended up in the university health clinic for 3 days on a drip, and they sent me off to the ER because they didn't know what was wrong with me. And just like, for some reason that no one really knows, sometimes I get really sick when I row. And so I started being afraid of competing. And when I was training for the Olympics, I had some indoor rowing events that I was competing in. And when I would come to those events, I would be so afraid of them that I would wake up the day of the event and I would already feel ill and I would have no appetite and I would be shaking. And it was like, what is going on with me? And it was the same for when I was competing in regattas leading up to the Olympics. Like I would wake up and I would feel sick and I would feel nervous and I would feel just horrible. Like it's hard enough to row. And then when you feel so ill, it's like so much harder. And so there was this like combination of being afraid of the pain, being afraid of getting sick afterwards. And so I was sure, like, when I go to the Olympics, it will be terrible. Like, I am going to be so afraid. And it's like almost debilitating. Like, you get to a point where you're like, I don't even know if I can row. And so I guess, like, when I was thinking about the Olympics and praying about it, more than coming to any specific position or time, I feel like my goal was like, I just want to enjoy it. Like I trained so hard for this and I enjoy rowing, but when it comes to doing these competitions, I feel awful and I get so afraid and I don't actually enjoy it. And so I was like, God, like, could I just enjoy it? Like, is that possible? I would really like that as an outcome. And so one of the most amazing things for me is on the day of my first race, I woke up and I felt great. Like I didn't feel sick. I didn't feel nervous, and I felt a bit nervous, but I didn't feel at all like I normally do. And I had this sense of just like peace, which was so surprising to me. And then I was sitting, just like looking over the city, and I put my music on shuffle. And the first song that came up on my shuffle just randomly was "I'm Not Alone." I'm not sure who wrote that song, but when I was at the World Championships in 2016 for rowing, and I really was very alone at that time because there was no coach, there was no team, it was just me. It was a whole story, but that had kind of been the song that I would like listen to over and over again. And so the fact that that song was a song that just randomly came up first when I put my music on shuffle, to me felt just like, I don't know, I felt like it was God's way of saying that he was with me, and that made me not afraid. Because I was honestly like kind of afraid, like what if I row and I like tip over because I'm in a single and it's going to be very wavy and windy and that would be terribly embarrassing. And all of this work that I've done, you just start thinking these things. And I just had the sense like it's going to be fine. Like I will be fine. And I was, I suppose. And I was able to enjoy racing. It was still tough, but I wasn't terrified and I didn't get sick the way that I normally did. I actually did get sick after my final, but that was my last race, so I guess that was okay because I didn't have to race again. Yeah, but I would say that was like the main testimony that I have from the Olympics, was just that first morning, not feeling sick, not feeling nervous, and just feeling so joyful about that.
Oh, wow. Very cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I guess just as a final question, I'm expecting we'll have some parents, maybe even some kind of young athletes joining us for this quiz. What would you say kind of to them, looking back at yourself, maybe as a younger athlete?
What would I say? I'd say do what you enjoy and invest in relationships along the way. I think when I started doing sport, I didn't think of it as so much as like a social thing. It was for like the sake of the competing and the exercise and whatever. But kind of like as I've gotten older, and especially I had the chance to train in some high performance places in the United States where people go there for multiple years just to develop as athletes, and they create these communities. And so I would say, like, as you do sport, get to know the people that you're doing it with, and connect with them, and just I don't know, enjoy the challenge of it and pushing yourself. And you never know where you'll end up. I did not expect to end up where I ended up. No.
So Kathleen, now that you've now that you've like finished with the Olympics in many ways, kind of what's next for you?
Yeah, so I feel like my focus now is shifting from being an active athlete training for the Olympics to being a coach and a promoter of rowing, specifically in Uganda. So as I mentioned before, rowing is pretty undeveloped in Uganda. We have a small group of people who have been committed to it over the years, but there's been so many frustrations around governance, around equipment being misused and damaged and broken. And so at the moment, there actually is very little equipment for people who are trying to row in Uganda, and there isn't kind of we have these clubs, but they're not actually active with athletes. They don't have competitions. I think we haven't had a regatta since 2014 in Uganda. So I'm working pretty closely with some of the people that are really key in the Ugandan rowing community, and we're identifying what are the needs and how can we go about reaching them. So one of the ways that we are hoping to do that in the short term is running a rowing camp. So I'm going back to Uganda sometime over Christmas, and so we're going to do a multi-day rowing camp. It's going to have three kind of aspects to it. One is providing an opportunity for people who have never rowed before and are interested to try it out. The second aspect of it is to work with people who are rowing in Uganda, who have maybe the potential to become national team athletes, and giving them focused attention to take them to the next level. And also, like, how much can you really change someone in 2 days in terms of their rowing technique? Not that much, but my hope is that by working with them in person and developing a relationship with them, that can continue forward. So they can like send me videos of them rowing, and I can kind of coach them from here. And then the third aspect of it is to kind of raise awareness about rowing in Uganda, and also to get some of the equipment that they need. So there's certain things that are broken in the boat. So there are slides. We have some boats and the slides are broken, so they can't actually use them at the moment. So purchasing those things that could be used to repair the equipment that we do have, and then also getting some new equipment like a motor for a launch, so that you can have a coach go along with the boats. So that's kind of what we're working on at the moment. And I think one of the great things that came out of the Olympics is that there was so much promotion around me and around rowing, and people who had never heard of rowing were like, oh, what's this rowing thing and how can I get involved? And I had random people messaging me saying like, oh, I want to row, like, where can I row? And I was like, gosh, I don't even know if you can, because we don't have the infrastructure yet in Uganda for people to row unless they live, right by Kisubi or right by Miami Beach. So yeah, so I feel like my focus now is shifting to promoting rowing in Uganda and partnering with the people who are there in order to create create an active rowing scene that will hopefully grow over the years and allow other people to get to a point where they can compete internationally for Uganda.
Cool. Great. Thanks very much. It's been, really wonderful having you coming to join us today, in person, virtually. But yeah, it's also been great just to catch up after a long time. So thanks very much for joining us.